There are three words that come to mind when looking back at the Boston Celtics 2008 NBA championship. Anything is possible. It's more like anything is possible. And those iconic words uttered by then Celtic star and now Basketball Hall of Famer Kevin Garnett have become the title for an upcoming documentary chronicling the life, career, and legacy of one of the NBA's all-time greats. Joining us now, the minds behind that doc, Marc Levin, Daniel Levin, and Eric Newman. Thank you all for joining. Marc, I want to go ahead and start with you. What sparked the idea to produce this documentary on Kevin Garnett?
Meeting Kevin 3 years ago at a Super Bowl party and engaging him in a conversation that went on for a good hour or two. I was just blown away. The intensity that he always exhibited on the court was alive there in person, and his intellect and just his interests beyond sports were fascinating. And that began a dialogue which ultimately led to this film.
Yeah, and Daniel, Kevin Garnett, for those who aren't familiar, the first player drafted straight out of high school in 20 years when he was 5th overall in 1995. I want to know, this also led to, of course, a string of other all-star players, thinking of like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, so many others that went on to do the same thing. How did Kevin Garnett pave that path for a lot of those players?
Well, as you said, he was the first to do it in 20 years. I think, not a lot of young players knew that it was an option and that it was a path that could be taken. And he obviously opened that door. You mentioned Kobe, eventually LeBron, and there's a whole wealth of other players in between. But I think, Kevin, he likes to say he was the rip in the matrix. He opened the door. So it was really a cultural shift as well. And then, of course, 3 years into his career, he signs a $126 million contract, which was the biggest in sports of all time. So he was a disruptor, he was a game changer, and I think a lot of people studied and learned from his moves.
Definitely. And Eric, worth noting that the current mandate from the NBA, players have to be either at least 19 years old and or a year removed from high school. So different rules now for this generation. Do you think that could change anytime in the near future?
Well, there's been a lot of rumors that we're about to see that change again. And what's really interesting, building on what Dan said, that rip in the matrix, we're dealing with a 25-year framework from 1995 to 2020 when we started to roll the camera. And the big thing for Kevin was he wanted to tell his story before that new rip happened again, that new cycle started again. So with the changes to college sports that we've seen, and of course the implementation of NILs and the role that the G League is now playing in a bigger way with the NBA, I feel like there's definitely some rule changes upon us that, of course, KG was originally responsible for putting into play with his move back in '95.
Marc, Garnett led the Celtics to that NBA title his first season with the team. It also gave that iconic anything is possible moment. Also the name of this documentary. For viewers who see it, what might they learn from that season that they didn't see from the outside?
Well, I may have to turn this over to Eric just because he is a Celtic fan. And of course, I live only blocks from Madison Square Garden and grew up a Knicks fan. So my feelings about the Celtics are, of course, mixed. I think Eric should handle this question. Go ahead, Eric.
There's been a lot of brotherly jokes between the three of us about the Knicks and the Celtics over the years. But we all know what the Celtic tradition and fan base is. And at the time in 2008, they had not won an NBA championship since 1986, had not been in the finals since 1987. So KG going to Boston, teaming up with Paul Pierce, teaming up with Ray Allen, and building that team and winning the championship was not only a huge thing for Celtic tradition, but more so for the NBA as it welcomed in the modern day super team era. And after we saw what the Celtics did, of course, LeBron James goes to Miami. He creates his big three there, and then the dominoes fall from there. And we've been seeing so many different teams trying to put together groups of stars for better or for worse during that time. But, you know, KG, huge role in bringing back the super teams, along with changing the power forward position. And then two of the things Dan alluded to earlier, both going from high school to the NBA and, of course, changing the business side of the game with that contract back in the late 90s, which was also tied to the NBA lockout, which occurred in 1998 before the season resumed in 1999.
And Dan, just about 30 seconds left, but this trailer is amazing. I think it appeals to a really big audience, sports fans and those who just want motivation. Was there something that you learned about Kevin Garnett, either on or off the court, during the filming of this doc?
I mean, I think what I learned is what an amazing storyteller Kevin Garnett is. He is able to tell a story in a way that is super captivating. And for me, it was just a pleasure watching him, you know, unfold his life in front of us. And I think, you know, the name of the film is Anything is Possible. Kevin always said he wanted this to be inspirational. He wanted people to be able to learn from his journey. So I hope that that's the takeaway.
I am sure that people are going to get exactly that. That's Marc Levin, Daniel Levin, and Eric Newman. Thank you so much for joining us here on Cheddar News. And be sure to watch Kevin Garnett, Anything is Possible, when it debuts this Friday on Showtime.